In the history of the United States Army, very few names evoke the sheer, unadulterated grit of David H. Hackworth. He was a man who lived his life on the razor's edge of combat, serving in 3 theaters of war to include World War II, Korea, and Vietnam in a career that spanned a quarter of a century. He earned 10 Silver Stars for Valor, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, and was awarded the Purple Heart so many times that the final official tally is often lost to legend. His career was so historic, it was used as the inspiration for the infamous film Apocalypse Now. This is the story of how David Hackworth went from a runaway orphan to battlefield legend, and why his name became synonymous with both heroic action and explosive controversy. David Hackworth was born in 1930. Unfortunately, before he reached his first birthday, both of his parents would pass away. Fortunately, his grandmother would take him and his siblings in as her own. However, growing up as an orphan during the Great Depression would prove to be very challenging. The family would be very dependent on government aid during his childhood. Throughout his adolescence, he would have several odd jobs to help contribute to his grandma and his siblings. When David was 10 years old, he found himself working steadily as a shoe shiner for the neighboring bases in the Los Angeles area. This would begin to indoctrinate David into military culture. David would find a second home with the service members he interacted with, where they began to influence his personality that would define his leadership in the years to come. After the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, David knew he wanted to serve as soon as he could, and would support the troops any way he could while World War II raged on. By 1945, at the age of 14, the war was beginning to end, but Hackworth was just getting started. He joined the Merchant Marines by lying about his age. David would complete a tour in the South Pacific during the final months before the war would end. After his time in the Merchant Marines, he found his way into the Army in 1946 at the age of 15, serving briefly in post-World War II Italy. He would use his documents from the Merchant Marines to lie about his age again, enabling him to accomplish his dream of serving in the military. He re-enlisted formally in 1948, and by age 18 was a private first class, but he was about to be thrown into the crucible of the Korean Peninsula. When the Korean War began in 1950, Hackworth was still a young man who was attached to the 25th Infantry Division. It was here during a grinding, brutal campaign that he would earn his first high decorations. His raw leadership was immediately apparent. He was rapidly promoted to sergeant at the age of 20, and then in a rare battlefield maneuver for a non-commissioned officer, he earned a battlefield commission to second lieutenant at age 21. In 1951, at the age of 21, during an advance near the Han River, Lieutenant Hackworth's platoon was pinned down by fire from a concealed heavy machine gun. He single-handedly crawled through frozen rice paddies and over 100 yards of exposed ground to get an angle on the enemy position. Ignoring intense small arms and mortar fire, he directed his men's fire and then assaulted the position, allowing his company to seize a critical objective. This earned him his first Silver Star. Later that year, outside the outskirts of Kulan, his company was stalled by concentrated fire from a well-sighted machine gun nest located atop a crest. Hackworth quickly gathered 3 volunteers leading a daring, unauthorized charge across an open, fire-swept landscape. They successfully eliminated the threat with grenades and small arms, breaking the enemy line. This would earn him his second Silver Star. Hackworth was wounded multiple times in Korea, including a serious wound during a fierce firefight on Hill 1061, where he refused immediate evacuation until the perimeter was secured. His first 2 Purple Heart awards came quickly as he consistently returned to the line despite injury. In 1952, at the age of 22, there would be a fierce engagement against a numerically superior Chinese force. Hackworth knows his adjacent company's withdrawal left his flank exposed. He personally manned an abandoned machine gun for over 2 hours, providing suppressive fire that stabilized the line and allowed the trapped units to consolidate their position. These actions would earn him his 3rd Silver Star. For his combined actions during the final push of the Korean War in 1953, which included one mission where he led a dangerous night infiltration deep behind enemy lines to reconnoiter a strategic ridge, he earned his 4th and 5th Silver Star for his valor. Hackworth ended the Korean War as a decorated officer and a veteran with combat experience far exceeding his years. After the conclusion of the Korean War in 1954, David would exit active duty service as a captain and try his hand at civilian life. He would go to college for 2 years studying history before returning back to military service as a captain. Hackworth would describe civilian life as boring and did not suit him. He would ultimately earn his bachelor's degree while serving in the military. David would subsequently be stationed in Germany during the construction of the Berlin Wall. He would also spend time training himself and units in preparation for the next conflict, which would be the war that solidified Colonel Hackworth as a military legend. The Vietnam War was where Hackworth cemented his legendary status. He served multiple tours, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel and commanding troops in some of the war's most brutal engagements. At age 35 in 1965, while serving the Long Drawn Valley, Hackworth's unit was ambushed. With multiple casualties and the command structure breaking down, he exposed himself repeatedly to direct enemy fire, organizing disorganized squads into cohesive fighting forces, enabling successful extraction of the wounded and preventing the entire force from being overrun. These actions earned him a 6th Silver Star. In 1966, Colonel Hackworth would earn his first Distinguished Service Cross. David single-handedly surveyed enemy positions and led an assault to rescue a unit of American soldiers that had been pinned down by enemy fire for hours. This would be the first, but not the last time, earning the country's second highest military honor. At age 37 in 1967 during Operation Oregon, his reconnaissance element was cut off and pinned down, Hackworth traveling in a support helicopter ordered the pilot to land in a hot landing zone. He jumped out and led a rescue force on foot, personally engaging several enemy fires to retrieve 3 wounded men who were otherwise certain to be captured or killed. During this combat maneuver, he had earned his 7th and 8th Silver Star for the similar heroic acts and rescues under fire. Simultaneously, while earning his medals for valor, the Purple Heart citations continued to stack up. At one point, he famously kept a large shrapnel wound wrapped with a makeshift bandage to avoid being evacuated, only accepting treatment when the combat subsided. He was wounded a reported 8 times in total, earning him the title of one of the most decorated living soldiers. At age 39 in 1969, as the commander of a special forces team in the Delta, Hackworth's unit was hit by a massive Viet Cong assault. With his perimeter collapsing, he personally engaged the enemy at close range. For hours, he moved from position to position, inspiring his men and directing fire, successfully repelling the attack and saving his company from annihilation. These actions earned him his 2nd Service Cross. At age 40 in 1970, while serving as an advisor, Hackworth learned an Allied unit was isolated and running low on ammunition while under heavy attack. He personally flew a small helicopter under conditions deemed suicidal, dodging heavy machine gun fire to land and deliver critical supplies, then used the helicopter's minigun to provide covering fire for exhausted troops. He received his 9th Silver Star from these events. Also in 1970, as a battalion commander, his unit was stalled during an assault near the Cambodian border, with troops hesitating under intense B-40 rockets and small arms fire. Hackworth abandoned his command post, walked the line under fire, and then personally led a charge against the main enemy bunker complex, inspiring the troops to fall and break the stalemate. This action earned him his unprecedented 10th Silver Star. Hackworth's service wasn't just collecting medals. His greatest military accomplishment may have been the creation of the Hardcore program in 1970. He took command of the demoralized 4th Battalion, 39th Infantry, a unit considered lousy by military standards. He implemented a revolutionary training program focused on small units tactics, real-world scenarios, and morale. Within months, he turned them into one of the most effective fighting units in Vietnam. The unit essentially out-guerrilled the guerrillas of the Viet Cong. But this level of intensity and integrity came with a cost. By 1971, at age 41, Colonel Hackworth had seen enough. Hackworth did the unthinkable. He appeared on ABC News special with Frank Reynolds and announced the war as a wasteland of corruption, incompetence, and poor leadership. He criticized the military's self-serving structure, its failure to train soldiers properly, and the flawed strategy of the conflict. This was an unparalleled act of whistleblowing by a senior officer of his standings. The fallout was immediate. Hackworth had challenged the very establishment that had decorated him. He retired later that year at 41 as a colonel. Hackworth's fight didn't end with the retirement. He moved to Australia and for the next 3 decades became one of the most influential and controversial military journalists in the world. His best-selling autobiography, About Face, became essential reading for military minds, exposing the flaws he saw firsthand. He worked as a contributing editor for Newsweek, offering blunt, no-punch-pulled commentary during the Gulf War, the Balkans conflict, and the early War on Terror. He continuously advised for leaner, better trained, and more effective military forces, never abandoning his commitment to the American soldier, even when challenging the generals. Colonel David H. Hackworth died in 2005 at the age of 74. His legacy has been captured in many books, but one of the most iconic derivatives of his life is the movie Apocalypse Now. Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore was inspired by Colonel Hackworth's valor as a helicopter commander that personally put himself in harm's way. The famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," is a quote that a reporter said about David Hackworth, the man who loved the smell of napalm and hated war. Colonel Kurtz was also inspired by Colonel Hackworth's time as the creator and commander of the hardcore unit and his philosophy on the war. David Hackworth's life was a dichotomy: a war hero who became a vocal critic of war itself, a decorated officer who exposed the rot in his own institution. His legacy is not just 2 distinguished service crosses with 10 silver stars or multiple Purple Hearts. It is an uncompromising demand for competency and integrity in leadership, a demand he paid for decades of service and a lifetime of wounds whose work continues to inspire to this day.